What if the Aztecs defeated the Spanish? Picture it. Obsidian blades flashing beneath a sky of burning gold, steel helmets sinking into the canals of Tenochtitlan, the causeways cracked, horses panicking, banners torn, and a city that refused to die. The moment Europe assumed victory becomes the moment the world changes course. The map bends, priests whisper, kings worry, and a civilization that the old world thought it could swallow begins to bite back. Before we twist history, let's ground it. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with a few hundred men, horses, cannon, and a daring plan. He wasn't marching alone. He built alliances with enemies of the Aztec Triple Alliance, most famously Tlaxcala, who saw in the Spanish a brutal but useful opportunity. He seized Moctezuma II in his own palace, leveraged fear and confusion, and when the city erupted, the Spaniards fled into the night. La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows, stained the waters with Spanish blood. But the story didn't end there. A smallpox epidemic tore through the Valley of Mexico, killing leaders, soldiers, and commoners alike, shattering the defenders just as Cortés returned with thousands of indigenous allies. The siege of Tenochtitlan was brutal, methodical, and devastating. Canals were clogged with bodies. Causeways turned to killing fields. In 1521, the island city fell, and with it, the old order of Mesoamerica. That's what happened. But what if one link breaks? What if the wave hits a different rock? Imagine this. Smallpox arrives later, or its first outbreak burns out among coastal communities, never reaching Tenochtitlan before the decisive fights. Moctezuma's successor, Cuitlahuac, historically a fighter who actually resisted the Spanish, survives long enough to consolidate power. The Mexica elevate ruthless, clear-eyed commanders who understand the Spanish are not gods, and that their power rests on horses, steel, allies, and gunpowder, and allies can be taken away. We shift the timeline. Cortés still flees on La Noche Triste, but this time the Aztecs don't waste the aftermath. Messengers fly across the trade routes, diplomatic runners thunder into Tlaxcala and beyond with a simple offer: live under Tenochtitlan, reformed, or die under the Spaniards. Promise tribute reform. Promise protection from foreign slavers. Promise steel and muskets for those who pledge. It's a bargain, and it lands. As the Spanish try to regroup, they find causeways trapped with hidden stakes, canals seeded with tar and reeds ready to burn, and indigenous allies suddenly hesitant, even hostile. Cortés pushes for the siege once more, and this time, he's the one walking into an ambush engineered by leaders who have spent their lives fighting city wars on water. The first cannon is captured, then a second. A horse goes down in a net. A rider is dragged from the saddle and paraded through the marketplace. The aura of invincibility cracks. A commander, call him Cuauhpili of Tlatelolco, figures out the rhythm of gunfire and reload, and the Mexica begin to time their attacks like the sea. The night shakes with war drums. Dawn reveals a battered Spanish column trying to escape down the causeway, harried from canoe and rooftop. Cortés never makes it out. A victory like that reverberates. Across Mesoamerica, it says, the strangers can be broken. And when rumors sail back to Cuba and Spain, storms, disease, treachery, a cursed city, a new reality forms in the minds of European monarchs. The New World isn't a gold chest waiting to be opened. It's a fortress with teeth. The Aztecs move fast. They aren't naive about what's coming next. They have seen what steel can do, and they can count ships on the horizon. Under an ascendant ruler, let's imagine Cuitlahuac holds power longer, or that Cuauhtémoc becomes not the last emperor but the reformer. The Triple Alliance turns inward, not to retreat, but to rebuild. Tribute is reshaped. Extract less food and cloth, demand more soldiers and craftsmen, establish workshops around Lake Texcoco dedicated to reverse engineering cannons, studying the weight and balance of swords, the geometry of crossbows, capture Spanish blacksmiths, offer them life and status in exchange for secrets, and the Mexica are very good at elevating skilled captives. They were doing it long before Columbus was a word. Horses spread, not romantically, but strategically. Riding isn't intuitive, and cavalry tactics take years. But the Aztecs are not alone. They can invite Tarascan metallurgists, Maya boat builders, and Highland smiths into a war college that didn't exist before. Suddenly, the Valley of Mexico hums with the energy of a city preparing for another age. Europe, meanwhile, recalculates. Spain built its early empire on a staircase of miracles, fragile alliances, disease, breathtaking gamble. With Mexico barred, the staircase collapses. The flood of silver that would later finance Habsburg wars is thinner for longer. The price revolution that rattles Europe, less brutal, less fast. Imperial ambitions across the Atlantic, slower, more cautious, more contested, but Spain doesn't sit on its hands. It sends another fleet, bigger, more crown oversight, fewer freelance conquistadors. They try a different coast. They set up a fortified foothold in the Caribbean and eye the Gulf like wolves at the edge of torchlight. This time, the Mexica know the scent. The Second War is not a duel. It's a diplomatic storm. Envoys from Tenochtitlan sail in canoes and then in captured caravels to Yucatan and beyond. They court Maya city-states. They promise shared spoils from broken Spanish forts. They court the Tarascans with metal-for-metal agreements and give them status, not subjugation. Trade routes thicken instead of shatter. The Aztec world, once an empire of tribute, starts to look like a federation forged by fear of a common enemy. Ships from Europe arrive to find not a scattered world of rivals, but a league. When they land, a line of horse-mounted warriors in cotton armor and bronze helmets, trophies of studies, waits with allied standards. Muskets answer muskets. Spanish letters back to Seville grow darker and tighter. The Empire of the Sun, the letters claim, knows gunpowder. If that happens, who else sails into the story? The Portuguese pragmatic traders lurk along every coast with beads, guns, and cunning. They smell opportunity. If Spain insists on conquest, Portugal will test commerce. Lisbon sends a caravel to a safe cove with gifts and terms, iron, gunpowder, a few horses, and a warehouse of curiosities in exchange for feathers, dye, cacao, copper, and, more importantly, exclusive rights to a port. The Mexica accept, reluctantly, because information is power. They demand Portuguese cannon founders teach in Tenochtitlan. They demand maps. Maps change everything. With a map, you don't just know where your enemy is. You know where you can be. Mid-roll note. As we walk this forked path, I'm curious. Does a victorious Aztec federation modernize into a gunpowder empire or fracture under the weight of reform? Tell me which path you find more plausible and why. If you're enjoying this alternate timeline, like this video and subscribe. This channel lives on your curiosity. Back in Europe, the missing rivers of silver have consequences. Charles V, emperor with dreams larger than his budgets, faces a different chessboard. The Habsburg-Valois wars still rage, but the wallet is thinner. German princes feel less imperial pressure. The Reformation still burns, but its fires drift. Perhaps the Ottomans press their advantage a bit further into Central Europe as Habsburg logistics falter, not a cascade of collapses, but a world where Europe's great powers focus on Europe a little longer, and the Atlantic becomes a slower, more complex game of agreements, embassies, and proxy wars. In the Americas, disease remains the darkest current. A single victory does not erase biology. Epidemics arrive, staggered, unpredictable, and merciless. But a defensive, organized Mesoamerica could cushion the blow. Centralized quarantine practices, ritual isolation becomes practical isolation. The Mexica already understood the logic of order in the face of chaos. They can rebuild aqueducts, reorganize food distribution, and keep the social body from shattering. The losses are still heavy. Entire villages disappear. But survival is different from surrender, and that difference ripples outward. By the late 1500s, imagine an Aztec-led league, call it the Lake Alliance, stretching from the valley to the Gulf Coast, tied by trade and treaty to Maya ports and Tarascan foundries. Tenochtitlan becomes less a ritual capital and more a diplomatic one, where emissaries from Portugal, later from France and England, present gifts in a palace decorated with captured standards and painted maps of the world. Missionaries arrive, not ahead of armies, but behind contracts. They debate with poet-priests in flower song, not torture cells. Some Mexica adopt cross imagery folded into their own cosmology. Some friars learn Nahuatl and admit, quietly, that these people are not barbarians with knives, but philosophers with feathers and bronze. Syncretic shrines rise on lake islands, cross and serpent, rain god and resurrection. Neither quite Christian, neither quite Aztec, but something new and surprisingly stable, because it was not imposed at sword point. Further south, the Andes become Spain's second obsession. Without a quick victory in Mexico, the push into Inca lands is delayed and harder. The Inca, warned by the hum of rumor, are more suspicious, more ready to split and then reunite. Perhaps Spain still seizes mines. Potosi's mountain does not move, but its exploitation is slower, more contested, and more vulnerable to interference from indigenous alliances and European rivals. The torrent of silver that historically flooded Seville in the late 1500s becomes a broad, shallow river with many hands in it. The global price of money still creeps up, but the shockwaves hit slower. North America, meanwhile, shifts in a different rhythm. Without a rapid Spanish stranglehold on the Gulf, French and English ventures probe the coastlines looking for less fortified opportunities. Jamestown and Quebec still happen, but their neighbors are not isolated tribes. They are emissaries from a sophisticated, horse-armed, musket-trained league to the south. Trade treaties leapfrog up the Mississippi. The Mississippian remnant polities, Caddo, Natchez, others, become brokers between worlds. The spread of the horse and gun means that the Great Plains transform earlier into a tapestry of mounted confederacies who are traders as much as warriors. By 1650, think of the Atlantic as a four-way negotiation. Spain and Portugal with their stubborn claims, England and France with their nimble ambitions, and the Lake Alliance as an American power with leverage. The Caribbean islands are still contested sugar jewels, but their fate is not written by European captains alone. Aztec corsairs, yes, that's right, set out in shallow draft ships to harass slavers and guard Gulf ports. Some are privateers with Portuguese papers. Some are patriots with eagle banners who've learned the price of letting others write the map. The slave trade? It changes, but does not vanish. The logic of sugar is cruel, and islands still thirst for labor. But with a powerful Mesoamerican state capable of interdicting routes and negotiating terms, the flow and direction might shift. More African states bargain on equal terms, selling to some, halting others. Some enslaved people, reaching Aztec ports, can be bought out by temples or adopted into clans, a pattern not unheard of in Mesoamerica, muting, in some corners, the totality of chattel slavery's grip. And what of technology? The Aztecs did not smelt iron or cast cannon in our history, not because they couldn't, but because they hadn't needed to. Under existential threat, need writes new scripts. By the 1600s, Mesoamerica could plausibly sustain workshops that cast small bronze and iron artillery, import complex pieces, and begin to tinker with matchlocks of their own design. They will not leap to Galileo's telescope overnight, but they will build star platforms and use European star maps with native calendars to track seasons and fleets. Schools arise where nobles learn letters as well as pictographs, Nahuatl alongside Portuguese and Spanish. Inside the Lake Alliance, reform meets resistance. Old nobles fear the loss of tribute. Priests worry that new gods will rot old foundations. Merchants smell profit and push change faster. The empire becomes a confederation not because it is ideal, but because it must negotiate survival. And negotiation politically matures a state faster than conquest ever could. Councils grow teeth. Laws are written and rewritten. The great speaker becomes the first among many. Still revered, but constrained by alliances and treaties, signed under oil lamps over maps that show too much water and too many storms. By the early 1700s, the Atlantic is a nervous system humming with messages. Europe's great wars still happen. Succession, 7 Years' War. But their outcomes tilt differently when American allies can deny ports or grant them. British redcoats in Boston talk not only about Parliament's taxes, but about Texcoco's tariffs. French envoys seek favor in Tenochtitlan as desperately as in Madrid. And somewhere in a ceremonial court on the lake, a scribe writes a letter to a king in London explaining politely that their ships will not pass today. Does an Aztec-led state industrialize? Not quickly, but who does? Even in Europe, the Industrial Revolution waits for coal, capital, and culture to align. What the Lake Alliance does have is urban density, craft skill, administrative complexity, and a newfound obsession with outsiders' machines. If coal deposits near the Central Plateau are discovered and exploited, if guilds evolve into manufactories, if a merchant class pulls more weight against ritual tradition, then by the late 18th century, you might see Mexico City ceaselessly rebuilt atop Tenochtitlan's bones, hosting foundries that belch smoke beside palaces where eagle knights debate rail plans with robe-wearing astronomers. And in the realm of spirit, a culture wounded by epidemics and weaponized gods finds a synthesis that is not surrender. Feathered serpent crosses hang in marketplaces. Priests of Tlaloc measure rainfall and keep aqueducts clean with an engineer's pragmatism. Holy days become festivals of trade. When European travelers write home about the place, they struggle to categorize it. It is neither pagan nor Christian, neither barbarian nor European. It is something else, modern in its own shape. The long revolution, independence, still comes to the Americas, but differently. It may not be the cry of colonists against a European crown. It may be a bargaining crisis inside the alliance. Highlanders demanding representation, coastal merchants demanding lower duties, Maya towns demanding language rights. The Enlightenment arrives by sea, translated through friars who became philosophers and nobles who became merchants. When change finally breaks, it breaks as a constitutional bloom rather than a colonial severing. A great speaker becomes a president, or a king becomes a symbol. The lake stays. Now, pause and imagine a world map at 1800. North America has a British arc, a French river spine, Spanish patches along the old places, and, most consequentially, an independent, industrial, curious, gunpowder-seasoned Mesoamerican state that has outlived all predictions. The Pacific becomes its new horizon. Manila galleons find rivals in Mexico-built ships hugging the Californian coast, dreaming of Asian trade without European brokers. Across the ocean in Kyoto and Canton, ambassadors in embroidered cloaks discuss calendars, eclipses, and the price of silk. Is all of this certain? Never. History is a maze of probability, not a machine of inevitability. Perhaps the Second Spanish Fleet lands during a famine. Perhaps drought breaks the alliance. Perhaps a plague flares that no quarantine can blunt. But the point of this exercise isn't certainty, it's sensitivity. Change one variable, timing of disease, the survival of a leader, the courage to reform, and the entire cascade refracts. We started with a simple knife edge. What if the Aztecs defeated the Spanish? The answer is not a fantasy of untouched paradise or naive heroism. It's a world of trade treaties and cannon smoke, of councils and compromises, of gods that learn new names and empires that learn restraint. It is, above all, a reminder that the story we inherited, steel, Bible, horse, and empire rolling through Mesoamerica like fate, was never guaranteed. History's hinges are small. The doorways they open are immense. And somewhere, beneath the modern breath of Mexico City, the lake still remembers the drums.